Hello everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you being here. I know the conference is drawing to an end. The room is warm, it's dark, it's cozy, and I've got such a relaxing voice that I guarantee at least one person will fall asleep, and that's okay. If you see somebody do that, just give them a nudge before the end, okay? So I thought I'd share some ideas and thoughts on what AI and data teams, their perspective, and how AI, data science, and business intelligence teams can work better with DevOps. I am a freelance consultant, and I work with organizations, and I tend to see the same things occurring again and again. It's a bit of it can be a bun fight a little bit, because there's very different priorities and perspectives. So I want to try and share some ideas how to sort of bring people together. So any questions at any point, feel free to ask. That's a younger looking me. Can you believe when I got that photograph taken? It took me weeks to get it back. And the reason for that was she said she had to whiten my teeth and get rid of my crow's feet. And I said, no, you're not getting a Kardashian. This is I want it to look like me. So that's what I got back. So you'll have to bear with me. I look about 10 years younger and with white teeth. So, so I wanted to really explain a little bit about how can we build that consulting word synergy. So I don't know if anyone here is consultants, but if you start to learn the buzzwords that leadership using, they'll love that. What's the synergy? So I had a bit of a play around with AI when I was creating the images for some of this, just because it was fun, no other reason. But so people talk about AI and a lot. I was sat on a conference call earlier today, talking about co-working, and AI came up, as you might expect. So the way that people talk about AI, it's like this mythical monster that's going to give us all of this value. It's almost like we are putting the universe in a box, and if we touch it, it's going to give us all the answers, a bit like the Oracle at Delphi. But actually, that's the hype cycle that we're in at the moment. And I think there's a pressure on AI and data teams to deliver all this expected gain from these systems. But the reality is that dealing with data is hard. Dealing with AI is also hard. And the reason for that is there's a lot of very misaligned expectations. I remember working with one large organization for 9 months. I was supervising a project. I had a team of data scientists, and we were trying to predict what made people likely to buy a particular product. Now, that's the kind of scenario you will hear in data science all the time. How can I predict who my best customer is? And after 9 months, we still couldn't get anywhere because any results were so weak. So I had to wait. I kept in touch with the end client all the way through and kept asking for the advice, but eventually we just had to say, look, we are torturing this data and we're still not getting anything. And that's hard because that's 9 months of investment. And somebody then has to go and explain to other people why they funded something for 9 months and it's got them nowhere. So that's embarrassing and awkward for business leaders to do that. And a lot of that actually for that particular situation was that the data was really poor. They were missing data. Some of that was also a bit of COVID because we were missing a couple of years of data. But even then, there was not enough data sources. We couldn't get access to the data. But still, we just found it was quite tough. But it's about misaligned expectations, I think. So I was just playing around. So value really matters because people feel they have to show the value, and value is whatever is meaningful to the organization. I think when I start these projects, I like to try and understand what is the objective, what is it they're trying to do? Are they trying to increase customer satisfaction? Are they trying to reduce costs? Are they trying to solve a challenge? Are they trying to automate to get something from here to here faster? And what I find with these projects is that they can go to use a skiing analogy, they can go off piste quite easily because you've got the hype. People come along and say, oh, right, we could get the AI to do this. We could look for that in the data. We could look for this, that, the next thing. And the problem with that is you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. But with DevOps, when I speak to DevOps people, they're trying to remove uncertainty from systems, trying to make things work in an automated and repeatable fashion. So you've got these two perspectives. You've got like yourselves as sort of guardian of how the systems are working. And then you've got these business teams saying, we want to do all this great stuff with our data. But it can be difficult to sort of bring the two camps together in some ways, and that was why I thought this would be a useful thing to talk about, to try and help you to see like different ways of tackling that problem. I do think when I'm dealing with organisations, they don't always understand the value of DevOps until it's too late, and then they need to try and reverse engineer something and bring it back in. So it's something that I personally try and talk about from the first meeting. Security, and also how do we protect these systems? Why are they not more resilient? Why are you still living in Excel is usually another question, but that's a topic for another day. So value is all about what is important to the business. And if the business teams can't identify that, then you can probably be the person in the room that says, look, we want to help to automate this, we want to make it productive, and to be that last mile of the solution where this is where the value comes in. This is the part that's going to make the money, which is automating. But in some ways, it's almost the first step as well, because when you've automated the solution, you've got everything nice and tidy. What do the business want next to generate more value from it? So I think it's value is just such an important thing that I see quite a lot. So another picture. I was clearly having too much fun. So I just, give me a shiny toy. I'm happy for hours. So one thing I think I see organisations talk about quite a lot actually is what tool will we use? And as technical experts, we're happy with those conversations. I think where the problem comes in sometimes is you're trying to automate the technology, getting everything in a nice, tidy, squared away state. But then somebody in the business team or someone in the AI team might come along and say, oh, there's this new technology that's out, we want to start to use it. And I see this again and again. It becomes like almost a research initiative for that person. It could even be, I don't know if you see this, but I see architectures that are built basically to augment people's CVs, because they want to be able to, resumes, they want to be able to put the buzzwords on the resume. And I look at architecture sometimes and I think, this is a resume architecture. You've got so many things in here. How do you look after all of these things? So I probably sound quite bitter, and I am, I should just be clear. So I'm trying to find hope. But I've been in IT a long time and I meet all sorts of scenarios and situations where people I try to assume good intentions, which can be quite hard sometimes, but I'm trying to assume that they're trying to do something for a reason that I can't see. And one thing is tool adoption. So I think what happens is sometimes in DevOps type project, where you're working as part of a much bigger estate, people will sometimes come along with technologies that you didn't know about. And that's not fair to you, because they've gone off and installed something or configure something, and actually that impacts you quite a bit because you're being expected to automate this and look after it, and you can't until you know about it. And it probably sounds like that doesn't happen a lot, but it does. I worked for one company who the CTO came down and pointed at me and said, I want a word with you. And I thought, gosh, what's this? And then he said, why have I got RavenDB, an open source database, on 15 of my production servers? And I said, I have no idea. Oh, but you're the data person. I said, well, it sounds to me like somebody somewhere has got too much administrative power on your production servers. Why are they installing Raven on that is nothing to do with me. It tells me actually the problem's yours. Too many people have got admin privileges and it wasn't me. And he was so angry. Anyway, I didn't get on well with him. We were not friends. But I think, I've been expected to pick up this thing that I knew nothing about. I'm still not a Raven DB expert. I don't pretend I am. But it's funny how suddenly that became my problem. And actually, I think sometimes with DevOps, because of where you sit in the process, sometimes it's a bit like a muddy river. You know, you pick up the silt and the dirt at the end and you're expected to work with it because the business just think it's all, you've all got fairy magic wands and you wave and, it's all fine. But as you know and I know, there's a lot of thought that needs to go into this process. So I can see both sides, that they're not understanding and respecting perhaps that you need to pick this up. This has suddenly been thrown at you. And I think organisations don't always understand the value of DevOps or where that sits in the process. It becomes covered in an IT box. And actually that's not really a good thing. So what we're trying to do, I think, is think about scalability. And when we look at artificial intelligence in particular, there's a lot of myths around AI. Now, so I'll tell you all the secrets, right? A lot of people are making stuff up, okay? Be very, very clear in that. And people we're honestly just trying and failing and covering things with buzzwords in the hope that nobody finds out until we actually get something we can show works. And I think that's what happens. It's try, test, fail. Try, test, fail. We're in this constant loop. Meanwhile, we're being chased by business teams who have got fear of missing out. They want to be able to say to their stakeholders, we're using AI, and they've put it on their mission statement. But we're trying to get the technology to torture the data, to do something, and to get it to work. I did my MBA. This topic was actually artificial intelligence and ethics. What kind of ethical models could you implement to try and make sure that your artificial intelligence was more ethical? But I eventually came to the conclusion, I didn't write this down, but actually the reason AI isn't perfect and it's not ethical always is because actually humans are not perfect either. We get things wrong, but we expect AI to come up with perfect results in a very noisy world. And actually, I don't think it's fair that we can ask artificial intelligence to do something that actually humans can't do either. I do see lots of headlines, AI can predict cancer tumours better than doctors can. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it gets people to a good place. But what does that actually mean for the workplace? Is you've got AI people who are having to throw things at you very quickly. They're having to think about their artificial intelligence models and getting these automated, deploying them, and then trying to make sure if something goes wrong, that actually you can rebuild all of that model, perhaps rebuild the data as well. So I think when I'm dealing with artificial intelligence, I don't think it's always very clear that they're living in this VUCA world, with volatility and uncertainty, but expected to produce results. But then that has a knock-on effect for you because you've got these models and suddenly you're landed with these technologies that they've been probably put together quite quickly. So they're not always built with DevOps principles in mind. So it's just to explain a little bit about that's what you're dealing with. There's so many pressures on people. In that 9 months project, the pressure on the team was incredible. I did try to shield them from it as much as possible. And there was times meeting the client, I'd almost be in tears because he would tear an absolute strip off me about it. And it was really, it was difficult. I was very glad it was Zoom calls and I could just switch off the camera because you honestly get your head in your hands. But then I realised the pressure was on him from someone else. And then you've got this big chain of all this pressure being handed around. But then that eventually gets passed to you because you're supposed to automate this model. So the thing is, if people want AI to be successful, they're going to have to think very carefully about DevOps, I think. Whatever form, whatever technology you're using, is we have to care about what happens once we've deployed the model and we've got the results we're looking for. I think sometimes for AI teams, they're not always thinking about that. They've just probably been through so much to build that model in the first place. So I don't know if that helps to explain that actually they're living in a very uncertain world, pressured, and then trying to pass something over to you probably quite quickly. The other thing I do find is data scientists and AI, particularly those dealing with open source, have a lot of stuff sitting in their laptops and they are not using any sort of repository. I can't tell you how much I hate that. I was looking after a few teams, one in the UK, one in Eastern Europe, and another in Spain. And there was maybe about 14 people in each team, roughly. And I swear everybody had different versions of Python. They all had different ways of deploying their models, which is different. Some had older versions, some had newer versions. And it was all on people's laptops. And it was just like, what are you all doing? This is really, really important. But then it's a bit like Excel and business users trying to prize it off. Because what people will say is, oh, but it works on my laptop. And that just, we have to say, no, we have to productionize that. And I think the reason it's hiding in people's laptop is because it's easier in some ways. The resources are not there. But I think also people are doing that because actually the models are not performing as the business are expecting. They're like 100% perfection every single time. And I think as humans, we can feel on the back foot, quite vulnerable and exposed if things are not working the way that people expect. So there can be quite a bit of friction as well, because from the DevOps perspective, you're thinking about stability, automation, making things predictable and safe. And in AI, it's quite hard because we're not dealing with safe results. And sometimes when I'm starting these projects, the business teams will ask me things like, so if I invest this much money in this project, how much will I get back? Now, it's actually, in any data project, that's really tough to answer because it might fail. There's that. So when if you're part of an infrastructure team where you're being asked to maybe help with server upgrades, for example, it's easier to translate that return on investment because you can say, well, if we buy this amount of storage or this servers with these optimizations, our data will get through faster, the website will be quicker, and then translate that into productivity. But it's harder to do with that with AI. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I think that's where it comes from, is the misalignment of expectations. Okay, so I was trying to find a picture of an angry developer. This is one of my dogs, actually, who's eaten one of the Azure teddy bears. So I thought, well, this is him coming to my desk to show me what he's done. But he does bring it to bed every night, and I can't not have him on my bed sleeping when he comes up with his teddy bear. I do have to say. I miss my dogs really badly because I'm here. So the idea is that people can get quite cross, and you can see it in all sorts of different ways. I don't know what Nimbus's upset was that day, but he's taken it out of my toy. But there's quite a lot of challenges, really, when AI are dealing with other parts of the business, not just DevOps, but with business teams and sometimes infrastructure not getting the resources they need. So there's quite a few challenges. I think one is a sort of issue over shared expertise, because you're familiar with technology that they might not be familiar with. So some of that, I think, is communication. When I'm leading teams, I tend to try and do brown bag sessions. You'd be amazed how many people will turn up to a lunchtime session if you're buying pizza. I'm not kidding. It's just like completely, it's like people will sell you the time for an hour because I've ordered pizza in, or chocolate cake, which was also another winner. Ice cream is also good. So the idea is just to get people around a table, and sometimes that's actually really tough. I've been in situations where the head of IT has walked out the room because the head of data has walked in. So sometimes the friction can be really real, and you're trying to deal with these personalities. So I think lack of shared expertise is a problem, and you can actually start to give people insights. I, I, I was just actually chatting with some of the other attendees over lunch, and we were talking about how people empire their knowledge. And you've probably come across this, and I see a few nodding heads, where you've got that person, you go to them for that thing, but they won't share information, really. It belongs to them. And that could be the person who's got the Excel spreadsheet that's running the business. They're not going to tell you how that works. They are just going to hide that to themselves. So I see that happening when a business is changing a lot. When a business goes from like startup, scale up, and then moves into becoming a bigger business, you can't just have one person responsible for everything. You have to scale. But it's quite hard for people to appreciate that actually the more information you give away, the more influential you become in the business. You become that go-to person, and the more knowledge and expertise you share, the more insights you get from everyone else. But also you're seen more as that technical leader in your organisation. And it's a mindset which I've been through this, and that's why I talk about this. It's hard at first to think about sharing information. It's nicer to be sitting behind a laptop and not talking to anyone, but to be the expert in the room without saying anything. But it's actually a way to build those networks within the organisation, is being that go-to person and just helping. So another thing that AI teams run into is integration challenges. So challenges with integrating with other technology and also other data systems as well. So I was dealing with one customer who went from just wanting to deal with one data source to wanting another 6 data sources brought into the solution, and wanting all of those brought in within a 2-week sprint. So you have to try and manage people's expectations. I think people think it's just copy and paste. We have to think about the sad path, and this is probably something you think about a lot in DevOps. You think the happy path, so what happens if it all works? And that's where I think people start. When you start early in your technical career, whatever that is, you think about the happy path. And then as you start to get bitter, like me, when projects don't go the way that you've planned, you start to come across the sad path. So what happens if it goes wrong? And then what happens if it goes wrong and then goes on fire? You know, that kind of thing. I'd maybe share this story, but I remember I was working in Italy and I didn't speak Italian at the time. I was just arrived, and I turned up and my servers were in the basement, and I thought I'll go and check on them. And then this Italian man was standing at the door and he was shouting at me, and I didn't understand what he said. So I just thought, and pushed open the door. The only word I'd understood him say was aqua, which was water. And then I went in, and I swear the whole basement was absolutely flooded. My CDs were in, because at the time it was CDs we were using to load software, and the plastic cases were just floating around. It was terrible. So I think since then I've realised actually you can always have things that will be unplanned. So I had a nice couple of days in Italy. I couldn't do anything, and my plane wasn't for another 2 days. So they took me to the supermarket shopping, and I bought panettone, so that was great. So that was a win for me, but not for the business, who were really angry. But that was not my fault. I hadn't flooded it. Promise it wasn't me. So there's quite a few challenges that you're just not expecting, and how those come your way. One is integration challenges, because people want data merged together. If you've ever tried to merge data from 2 spreadsheets together, you will know how painful that can be. This data will not match that, and it can be really difficult. So then that brings us on to data management issues, because you'd be surprised how many organisations don't back up their data properly. When I'm leaving a project, sometimes the CTO or the CEO will come up to me and say, can you tell me 10 things about your organisation that you feel difficult to say, or you just don't want to tell me? Because you've been here however long, and you will have seen things, and I just want to give you some space to write a few things. So sometimes they'll say 10 things, and I find it quite easy to write at least 20, so that's fine. Sometimes I only come up with 5. But one organisation was, the issue was you're not doing your backups at all. And that for me was scary. I tried to raise it lots of times and I couldn't. And so eventually I gave the CTO his list and said, you're not backing stuff up. So he said, show me. So I did. And then he went down and fired the contractor who was supposed to be doing the backups. And that wasn't nice. It was a horrible situation for me because I had not expected that outcome. I thought there might be some sort of halfway house. But I was glad they recognised the importance of backing up their data. They would have lost everything otherwise. And that keeps me up at night, actually. So sometimes there can be a bit of cultural resistance, I mentioned earlier, people that just don't want to share information. I think sometimes they get left behind, and it's a real shame. I was working with one organisation, and the gentleman involved was adamant that SQL Server 2005 was all that they needed, and he was not moving or upgrading his solutions from anything above. And it was really hard because you end up with people in big organisations find it easier to hide. So, and they're owning the data, and it's very hard. So I had to unpick all of his systems and think about upgrading. So there's quite a few reasons why things start to go wrong. But we've got these misaligned perceptions. So this, I don't know if you can see that, it's a report called DORA. You can go and download it, it's freely available. And what they went off and did some really nice investigation about the state of DevOps in the industry. So it's actually a really interesting read. So what it asked was, very simple question, does AI make you more productive? And they asked developers. And what actually surprised me, I think, was that they said only slightly increased the productivity. Now, I'd expected more of that. I've heard people here at this conference saying, oh, I get, Copilot to help me with that, or, any other tool. So I dug deep a little bit, but what I found was that actually people said initially it helps them to create the code, but then they're spending more time validating and testing that code because they don't think it's right. So overall, as a tool, it was only slightly increasing their productivity because they were having to spend so much time reviewing and checking the code. And I recommend, honestly, that you do that. Because I so dealing with AI, I can see it does produce a lot of hiccups, and it just does that. You can see how it got to that place. Sometimes if you're using ChatGPT as an example, it will come up with fake references and fake quotes. So people have to go through and check everything. Don't trust it. But you probably wouldn't trust people either. Or maybe that's just me, but I wouldn't trust people or the systems. So they said that it increased adoption by 25%, but the same people believed that AI adoption led to 1.5% less delivery throughput, and it made the systems less stable as well. And 7% of people believed that it overall was making things less stable. So there's a lot more at play, I think, and that's some of the myth around AI is it makes people more productive, and actually you're having to check more. So it means that AI might help you, but it's not necessarily reducing the time that you spend on tasks that are quite boring. So there's quite a few challenges. I think it's a bit like big data solutions. Maybe 10 years ago, big data was the hashtag. And people started to use big data solutions and found that they didn't work very well, or they didn't work as they expected. I spent a week trying to install Hadoop. It was horrible. Not repeating that again. So things have got easier. So I think what happened was people failed the first time, learned a lot, and then come back the second time. And I think AI is doing this as well. I asked ChatGPT to come up with a picture about AI adoption. I've no idea why it's done that, but I found it so entertaining that I just left it in. I don't know why it's got cobwebs up there. And anyway, everyone's looking horrified. I don't know why. There's no happy faces in that one. What's it not telling us, So one thing is the skills shortage. I think personally that testing is an underrated skill. When I'm putting projects together, I always make time for testing. I'd rather deliver less, but have it tested more. And I regularly have fights with business leaders over this. They think development doesn't need testing. And I come back to that survey and say, look, we have to check this. We have to check. So another thing is data quality. There's data quality problems all over the place. If you've ever dealt with any Excel spreadsheets, you will know that there will be data quality there. Security concerns is a really interesting one. As artificial intelligence becomes more popular and people are having more models, what I find so interesting about it is how easy people can hack models and get them to produce the completely incorrect results. So what I'm seeing in the industry is that people, when you train an AI model, first of all, you give it like an initial set of data, just to give it something to work with. And then what you can do as the model progresses is you can give it that set of data, you call it a validation set at this point, just to see what it does. But what I'm seeing in the industry is that people are hacking in, they're messing around with that initial data set. And the models are just running and they're using this data. So it's actually quite easy to poison an AI model because it's just looking at the data set. It doesn't know it's been, someone's been messing around with it. So there's that, and it's quite an interesting area of cybersecurity. So that's just something to watch out for. I'm not a security expert. I've seen enough to scare me, and that's why I don't become an expert. I leave that to the people who are. So I don't know if you find this, but I find any part of any solution, the hardest thing to change is the people. Now, some people really like this book, Who Moved My Cheese? Other people find it a bit patronising. If you've not read it, I recommend that you at least look at it. The idea is about change management. People don't like change and they don't like to be changed. And you will see this so often, trying to I think what I see is people, you give them a new technology system and they like the one that they've got because there's not enough features there for them to move. But they might say, well, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. And what they actually mean is, I like what I had already. Why are you forcing this change in me? I don't need it. I hear that a lot with projects where I'm using Power BI because the organisation has been very Excel heavy. You give them something else and they say, well, has it got an export to Excel button? And say, well, yes, it has, but this isn't kind of the point. And they just want the tables. So Who Moved My Cheese? I just thought if people haven't read it, it's an interesting read just to explain that sometimes people feel you're taking the toys away from them. So if you're dealing with AI people and they're asking you for all sorts of things, that's their toys. So it's hard sometimes to work with that. People don't like feeling that they've had the toys taken away from them. And in technology, it's quite easy for people to feel like that. So here's some of the benefits. This is what the business here, I just put a quick list up. It's going to improve their decision making. It's going to give them all these things, increase productivity. But there's always a cost to these things as well. I think these are the expectations that people are up against if they're in AI. And this is what you've got to deal with in DevOps because you've been handed these models and these data sets and been asked to look after them. So there's quite a few risks with AI generally. I think sometimes when I speak to people, they know that there's risks, but maybe haven't articulated their concerns about AI in quite the same way. So one is compliance. I don't know, many projects have started where people have not considered personally identifiable data at all. There's all sorts of regulations wrapped around that. So if someone comes to you with an AI model, these are the sort of questions that you can start to ask. What did you do with the data? What's compliancy is covered? Where's the data going? And who is it using to? Who's using it? So in keeping security, best practices is also important. You know why, things will just go wrong. I've seen, in my career, I've seen quite a few breaches. And they derail organisations for about 3 or 4 months. It's a complete sidestep because the business have to go through and check everything. People have lost trust and they're all pointing fingers at each other. So obviously easier to think about that from the start. AI governance. If you are dealing with an AI team, ethics may not be hugely important on their radar. They're thinking about getting the numbers to work, not necessarily is what we're doing a good thing. I'll give you an example. There was an airline in the UK And what they did was they made algorithms that identified if you were more likely to pay more to sit together. So the idea being, if you booked for a family of 4, say 2 adults, 2 children, the algorithm would say, all right, we'll place these people in different parts of the plane because they're more likely to pay more in order to sit together. Now, personally, as a family person, I think that's really shocking, because for that family, that's probably their summer holiday. They've saved hard for that. This is their time together. And the margins in aviation are so thin that they've decided that they're going to build an algorithm, of all things, to split people up in a plane so that they pay more to sit together. So these are the sort of things that people don't think about. And it seems to me that that idea, I think it's personally a really bad idea. I think it's terrible to treat people like that. But so I'm travelling in my own and I don't really care where I sit that much, but I don't want to be taking up a seat that means that a child can't sit next to their mum. You know, it just doesn't make sense. So, but the idea is that when we think about ethics, sometimes someone's idea turns into design, turns into development, it turns into test, and then it gets deployed and it's through the business, and nobody along the way has said, is this really a good idea? What should we be doing? Now, there are a whole bunch of ethical frameworks that you can use that will help your business to identify or at least consider the ethics. So if I know Microsoft have got their own packages. One is called Fair Learn. It's looking at equity and bias in systems. There's also more business-focused ones. One is called Aquitas, which was built, I think, by the University of Chicago, and it's open source, so you can go and have a look at that. When we look at Python, Python's got quite a few fairness and ethical toolkits. They're aimed at developers, but the idea is that it gives you some checkpoints to consider as you go along. They're highly configurable. And when you get an AI model that's using, say it's in Python or something like that, looking at these models, you can start to ask the question, well, has it got the ethical checklist? Did it pass the checklist? How are you handling these different scenarios? It's a very interesting area, and it's become increasingly popular for people to think about that, I think. So there's, if you're interested, the Python kit, there's a few, but one it's in scikit-learn. So you can go and have a look at that. Scikit-learn is quite a popular package. It's got some fairness in there as well. So it's just helping you to not just deploy the model and get it repeatable and automated, but it's about thinking about the why. Why are we doing this? And is this the sort of right thing to do? So it's just a risk, I think. I think businesses tend to apologise after they've been caught and not before. So I think it's quite stressful. So there's a few items here about understanding the nuances of workflow. So, but in AI, we often need things to be dynamically scaled. So we need to think about our workloads, and workloads are often really unpredictable. You probably see this in databases as well, lots of peaks and troughs. So we can use AKS, which is obviously in Azure, to actually help us to mitigate against that. We can also think about Azure machine learning. When you set it up in the interface, you can actually set it up whether it's going to auto-scale and whether it'll dial back down again or not. So there's different ways that you can train the model using smaller compute. So you can do that. And if you look at Azure machine learning, then it's actually got different options for doing that. I think one thing that's useful is you may not do that part yourself, but at least to ask the questions about how is this being scaled? What do you need it being scaled to? You know, how is it actually working? Because I do know sometimes people set everything to the max and then walk away and leave it, and actually maybe that's not the right thing. So just a few comments before we start to wrap up, take some questions. So something people are thinking about is there's lots of tools in Microsoft to help you to think about this. So machine learning using GitHub Copilot is one option. We're trying to think about Microsoft Fabric as well, which is becoming so much more popular now. We're thinking there mainly about bias in data and how we can mitigate against that. It's starting to look at the data more to see if your data set is actually biased. You may have heard of one vendor who was using AI to help assess CVs for technical jobs, and it was putting forward men more likely to propose a man for a technical job than a woman. And they realised that the way it did that was because 90% of the data set were men. So that's what it knew more about than it did the 10% of women. So what you can do is use algorithms that will help you with that bias. One is called SMOT, and basically what it does is it takes the 90%, identifies the patterns in the data, like descriptive statistics, squeezes that down a little bit, and then for the 10%, identifies the patterns there and expands that up. So that's very high level how it works, but it means they're more likely to get some parity then. So yeah, these sort of tools can help you to think about that bias. So sorry, I'll just start to speed on. So yeah, we've already been through this, through that part and that. So just a few sort of ways that AI, maybe that's where the unity starts to come in, starting to use more AI in your own. But it's thinking about AI-specific testing and monitoring. I think that's becoming more popular when I look at data anomalies and predictive maintenance. So maybe we'll start to see it coming more into DevOps as well. So Azure DevOps pipelines are going to come in with more AI-powered tools. That sounds very cool. Also, test cases as well. AI is very good for helping you with test cases and test data, so you can use it for that too. Again, automating the scripting sounds great, but if you're spending just as much time having to check it, then maybe it's not so great. So again, it's about kind of swings and roundabouts, really, I think. So we've also got MLOps in Azure. So it's a set of practices you can look at from the Microsoft website to help you to identify things like the model version, but also the dataset version as well. I mentioned earlier the dataset, people messing around with it. So if you're versioning it, you can measure whether the dataset is the way it was left, or things as time moves on, like data drift. Data drift is where your data set starts with a specific set of descriptive statistics, then the data changes, maybe because you've introduced new products and services, but the data's moved on because the business has moved on. So just a few examples of people thinking about using DevOps and AI. So Microsoft have got a good study in their website, a case study. So they use AI, integrated those in their pipelines, so you can go and have a download of that. And Adobe have also done the same thing. They're using DevOps to really help with their creative cloud. So just a quick summary. Informal knowledge training. So just helping one another and being that person, that go-to who shares information, shares data. So, and sharing with each other is a good thing. So informal knowledge sessions, that's the way I like to do it personally. Helped you to understand what does an AI model lifecycle management look like. And actually it's not going to be as linear as you might think. There's going to be lots of iterations. Versioning the data is also important, not just for cybersecurity, but just for AI. You want to be able to see how the models have changed over time, if they're still accurate. Hyperparameters about tweaks to the models. How can we tweak them to make them better? So your DevOps, your AI people can help you to do that. So we've got a few slides. So key takeaway. So it's all about scalability in AI, and I think as DevOps teams, you can really help your organization with that scalability and robustness to bring AI back into the loop again and try to make sure that it's been used effectively in the organization, that it's not sitting in people's laptops, but it's actually become robust and repeatable. So thank you for listening to me and thank you for staying awake. Did anyone have any questions? Hello.
I had a comment that you've said it twice about data sitting on people's laptops.
Yes.
It's actually something I struggle with on my team.
Yes.
People don't check in their code. Wondering how much you've experienced that and if you have any tips to get people to go to that next step.
Yeah, I see that all the time. It drives me absolutely wild, and I really sympathise. So I tried two approaches. I try and, it takes a long time, but I try and find you call them change agents, people that in your team that actually do check in their code. I like to just assume good intentions, that actually they're not doing it because they don't know how. So I do try and give a training approach. I held a meeting with a team, all in different parts of the world, and asked, what are you doing with versioning your data and your code? And I got a different answer from every single person. Some people using Snowflake, Snowpipe, and using that, checking stuff in and out. People using GitHub and GitLab, and it was all over the place. So what I said as a team, I said, just choose a technology. Which one would you like to use and why? So you have to, I got everyone to do a session really to say, well, the way that I do it is the preferred solution because. So I made it a bit like that, like a stage gate. We're not using it unless it passes certain items. So, but it's really hard because you're trying to help people to own the decision. Because I don't want to dictate to them to say, well, you use this. So I got them to do, it was over months, a show and tell. So you're using Snowpipe. Why don't you do a brown bag session and tell us how that works? And then some of the other team members said, I didn't know it could do that. All right. So it was a very long time, a change process, but eventually I got it where most of the team were starting to check in their code, and it was a real struggle because they were going from having a sort of little kingdom in their laptops to alignment, and that meant there was a bit of ghettos in the team as well. So I had two people who were sharing code, which sounded really good, but they were learning really bad habits off each other, and it was really not very good. So I was having to try and break up that ghetto that they'd built. And it's a shame because I liked the fact that they worked so closely. It was just the fact that they both needed a raise, like a real lift in best practice. So I had to kind of split them up for a little while. And, you do this project, you do that project. And but it was really awkward because we used Teams there. And I had visibility of their Teams chats. And the things they were saying about me was just terrible. So it was really hard actually, because I took it to my boss to say, And he said, oh yeah, I needed to talk to you about that. And I said, I didn't recognise that person. But it's because I was taking their toys away. They didn't like it. So one of the individuals they actually ended up having a bit of a word with. I didn't want that to happen. I'd been trying to do the positive, gentle, come to water kind of.
That's stuff I've been trying.
Yeah.
So I like that idea of maybe getting them all in a room and do a training.
That's it. And be prepared to do that over a length of time. So why are you using this thing and what's good about it? Tell us what you like about it. And then you see their natural enthusiasm come across. And then the others might think, oh, actually, that is quite a good idea. Yeah. Also, because we were using Snowflake, and I got them to attend Snowflake conferences as well. Yeah, so, sorry, I need to wrap up, they're telling me off. But hopefully that helps. You just give you some ideas. But thanks so much for joining, and I'll let you go. Thank you. Thanks.